Just 5 days before the midterm elections, U.S. President Donald Trump is under fire for tweeting an ad campaign. Critics call it racist and divisive.
You know, only thing that was dead is if I can just kill too. I wish I kill more of those kill more cops too.
He says he wants to apply for pardon for the felony he committed. Attempt of murder.
Let's bring in CTV's Richard Madden. He joins us from Washington. So, Richard, a lot more beeps there that we had to put in than we heard words. But tell me about the reaction to this.
Well, first and foremost, this is an ad that's going to be meant to be shared online. I don't expect we're going to see it on broadcast networks in the U.S. as we hit the critical final stretch for these midterm elections. But it's been met with a lot of controversy and a lot of outrage that not only is the president using race baiting and a dog whistle, he's using a massive megaphone to whip up his supporters and encourage them and motivate them to get to the polls ahead of Election Day on Tuesday for this critical midterm election. There are several tight races that the president hopes that Republican turnout will tip the balance in favor of the Republicans. But this is not a big surprise. This is exactly the playbook Trump used at the start of his campaign to become the Republican nominee. You'll recall when he accused Mexicans of being rapists and they're bringing drugs and crime. This is not just that tactic. This is amplifying it to a whole new level. And from the ground, from Republicans at Trump rallies, they love it. And this is a way to get them motivated to head to the polls on Tuesday.
Yeah, and let me ask you about those rallies as he continues this campaign tour in Florida. He was in Florida last night, and he continues a campaign rally tour today about that tone that just keeps ramping up.
I mean, this is coming from a commander-in-chief who's been calling for unity and to tone down the rhetoric, but he loves being on the campaign trail, and he is using these emotional attachments to get his supporters really revved up, and it's a strategy that appears to be working. But what the concern is how this is being perceived by moderate Republicans, people in tight House races in various states. And many of these people are saying that this is becoming problematic, a bit of a headache. They want to focus on the economy. But Trump, of course, is trying to find a new wedge issue to drive home Republican support on Tuesday. This is obviously a time strategy for Trump, not only to whip up his base, as we've been discussing, but also to deflect from another real concern, and that is the spate of violence and threats that we've seen over the past week, whether it's a mass shooting in a synagogue in Pittsburgh or potential pipe bombs that were mailed to prominent Trump critics and CNN. So as part of the country is looking at, we need to tone down the rhetoric and the harsh language that critics are using against each other, Trump is deciding to go a different way and make this all about immigration. In fact, later this afternoon at the White House, he'll be outlining more plans to really beef up security at the southern border. Just yesterday, he said as many as 15,000 troops will be sent to the southern border to block the so-called caravan of migrants making their way from Mexico into the United States a few weeks from now. Up to 15,000 troops. That's more troops than the U.S. has in Afghanistan and Syria. So obviously, Trump is using the powers he has as the president to really get his message across, using troops to whip up enthusiasm by his supporters about the migrant crisis and about illegal immigration.
Yeah, and you mentioned, a number of tight races, one of which is in Georgia. And just a few minutes ago, we dipped into a campaign rally there on behalf of the Democratic candidate. Oprah Winfrey was out supporting her. So this race, from what I understand, it's neck and neck.
Well, a lot of the attention is focused on, will the Republicans keep the House, will they keep the Senate? But there's a really important there are several important elections going on in the midterms that doesn't really get the focus that it really deserves. And these are these so-called down-ballot races, the keys to the governor's mansion. In Georgia, it's a real stunning, very interesting race. You have Stacey Abrams, who would be the very first female black governor in U.S. history. And the typical red state Georgia is now neck and neck, according to polls, between the Republican Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams. Oprah Winfrey stumping for Abrams today to a mostly black audience is meant to drive more voters to the polls to support Abrams. Meantime, at the exact same time, you have Vice President Mike Pence, who's stumping for the Republican in another part of that state, hoping to whip up Republican enthusiasm. And tomorrow, former President Barack Obama will be in Georgia to ensure that the crowd there and voters there get motivated. And then on Sunday, President Trump will be in Macon, Georgia, to get to put the Republican, what he hopes, over the top. But controlling a state house is very important in the U.S., and I'm looking at several key races. Georgia is a big one. There's several other ones, Wisconsin, Colorado, and so forth. The reason why this is important is because you have a situation in the U.S. where the Republicans have tipped the scale on the Supreme Court. There's questions about whether abortion rights will be repealed, the so-called Roe versus Wade ruling from back in the 70s. State houses could have the power to flip that, and then it goes to the Supreme Court. So states, Republican control versus Democrat control is critical for the Democrats to gain control of these state houses. And then from there, it's the party in power that then carves up the districts for the next election. The Democrats got completely clobbered in the last few midterm elections. Republicans control the bulk of the governor's mansions in the U.S. This could be a big wave for the Democrats if the polls hold true until Election Day.
That is interesting. Richard, thank you so much.
You bet.